about troubleshooting executive team disasters. What is an executive team disaster? It's when you have fallout, when you have people at each other's throats. You might have resignations, you might have massive turnover, you might have massive conflict. And it happens to the best of teams. How? Why? How does it happen? Why does it happen? I was just looking at an organization that was doing really well. They come through a difficult time. They banded together during COVID. And then the CEO left, another senior executive left, board members left. I'm like, oh, the house of cards has come down. And it's because they didn't navigate some of the key challenges. And the framework that I'm going to unpack, some of you may be familiar, if you've read People Stuff, is the 4 devils of People Stuff. And it's so fundamental. It's easy to take it for granted and not deal with it. We just assume because people are at an executive level that they've got their self together and that they are immune to some of these people challenges. No. We are all humans. We are all susceptible to these common challenges. So let's have a look. In a map that I prepared earlier, it's another beautiful quadrant model, my People Stuff quadrant model, the 4 devils piece. And when we have executive teams that go pear-shaped, there's usually a driving centrifugal force, which is the red circle of my model. And what happens is that we have a fear of loss. That's what's at the center of it. Fear of loss. And even though humans have evolved considerably, our civilizations have evolved amazingly, especially in the last 20 to 50 years, we are still equipped with the same biological chemistry that we've had for the last 100,000 years or so, which serves us well and doesn't. Doesn't serve us well when we're dealing with intricate executive team dynamics and you have these bags of mostly bones and water around the table reacting in a biochemical soup kind of manner. That's what we've got to deal with, and we're included with that. What we hope to do is become more aware when our bags of bone and mostly water does get triggered. And it's like, oh, there's my biochemical triggers happening. And fear of loss is a primal one. It puts us into fight and flight. That's our amygdala gets kicked into gear and we go into survival mode. And all sorts of unhelpful behaviors occur as a result. So there's 4 different types of loss. The first one is loss of power. Power, the first P. Loss of power. This is all about losing autonomy. So if you think about your executive right now, and any decision that you've made as a collective or as a CEO that's going to affect one or more of your team members, have a think about this. Is it affecting their ability to make decisions for themselves in that particular area? In other words, is the change being done to them? Do they feel like they had a voice in it? If the answer is yes, it is being done to them, and no, they did not have a voice, oh my goodness, you are going to have loss of power and loss of autonomy on your doorstep. And typically the behavior we see here is firebug behavior. Angry, frustrated, vocal, argumentative. That's why I call it the firebug. They're kind of all lit up. So loss of power can do people's heads in, that's for sure. And you think because they're executive, they might be beyond these petty rivalry things. No. This actually increases turf wars because people then start to claw back responsibilities that they had. They want to maintain some control of their territory, of their responsibilities, of their sector. And so this is where turf wars really come to the fore if you have a loss of power piece happening. Okay, that's the first P. Now, the second P is loss of position. Position. This one actually it trips people up all the time because what this is all about, this is about threats to status and fairness. Now you think an executive, they've got a nice juicy title, a pay packet and privilege to go with it. Surely they're okay with status. No. All of us are really super sensitive to this. And it's not necessarily about the trappings of status, like titles, like privileges, like parking spaces, like whatever package you have for privilege. It's also, this is really about respecting people's experience and expertise. So if you've ever been in a meeting where you have a depth of experience in a particular area and someone dismisses your opinion, ever had that happen? Did your hackles go up? Did your face get flushed and you get really irritated and peeved? Well, yes, that happens to me. If I get passed over for my experience, it would drive me nuts. So this happens in personal matters. It happens big time around the boardroom table when you're having discussions and you haven't necessarily brought in people's expertise or acknowledge them. So this can send them into really unhelpful states, emotional states. And this particular trigger, the status and fairness one, makes people more emotional than angry because we feel hurt. We felt hurt and squashed and diminished. And it's a different kind of response than losing our power. This one it can turn us into emotional tirades. And so all of a sudden we're emotionally ranting and we don't even know what we're ranting about. And certainly the people listening to us don't know what we're ranting about either. And this can be problematic when it comes to team dynamics. Because if you've been in a meeting like that where someone goes off their nut and is doing an emotional rant, you're just kind of like, how do you deal with that? And it makes people awkward and it's really hard to recover from that. So this is one of the triggers that helps people have a meltdown. We'll talk about solutions in a moment. So that's the second P, is the position, loss of position. The third P is loss of place, loss of place. And this is really about our sense of belonging, that really important primary survival need to feel like we are part of a team and that we are connected and safe and trusted and trusting. And that sense of oxytocin that comes from that is super, super important. If this is absent in an executive team, you will not get to team flow at all. It's one of the core ingredients that's necessary. So if somebody feels like they are not part of the group, and why might they not feel part of the group? Maybe they haven't had a proper induction process. Maybe there's some in-jokes. Maybe it's because they're new to the team and they're kind of doing that pecking order thing. They're not sure quite where they fit. They're not sure of how things get done around here. All those things can contribute to a sense of isolation. What happens in terms of the unhelpful behaviors is that people can do one of two things. They become emotional vampires, and they're kind of sulky and scowly, and they're like every time they move through a room, they suck the energy out of it. Those kind of energy vamp, because they're emotionally challenged, but they're not verbally expressive about it. So they express their distress through this palpable negativity. And it's kind of icky to be around. And it's really hard to deal with because you're not sure what exactly is going on, but you just know that there's something wrong. That's one way that we can show up in this area. This is why we call them water bomber. They come in and they kind of just bomb people with their emotions. The other way the water bomber shows up is as a clam. They're just, and you know there's something wrong. It's like, how are you? Fine. And they do the clam lip thing. But they're like, shut up. And also really difficult to deal with because you know there's a challenge. Hard to get them to open up and talk about it. So this is the third P, is loss of place, that sense of connection and place in the team. The third P is loss of performance. Performance. This happens when people feel overworked. So I was talking to a general manager and her operating officer yesterday, and that's certainly what's the cracks that they're seeing in their executive team is around this issue. They had a massive workload last year through COVID, and they kind of just scraped through. And it's starting to have a telltale negative effect. But because they were such a tight-knit team, they're finding it very difficult to articulate challenges to that. So the general manager was feeling that people weren't being too honest with each other. She could sense that things weren't going well, but she didn't feel like they were able or willing to have the honest conversations about it. And that was concerning for her, and rightfully so. So what happens here when we are threatened by overwork, by this threat to loss of performance, this is frightening for us because it attacks our inner achiever. We all want to perform, we all want to deliver, and we feel like we've overburdened that we're going to fail. So it's a fear of failure that's built into this. But we don't want to complain because we feel challenged by complaining. So what happens, all that emotional energy goes underground. This is why I call it a ground splitter. And that underground energy can turn up like backbiting, undermining, white-anting, complaining behind hands, or whispers in the corridors, or some way people are offloading steam without having to bring it to the table and make a big deal out of it. It's a problem. So these two bottom ones here, loss of place and loss of performance, which is the water bomber and the ground splitter, are two of the most challenging behaviors because people won't necessarily speak up. And so you've got to do a lot of groundwork in order to set the conditions to help it improve.